This is Democracy Watch. Mark, we have got an unhinged statement from Donald Trump. I'm going to put it right here on this screen. He says that Joe Biden lost the 2020 presidential election by a landslide. Biden was grossly incompetent and the 2020 election was a total fraud. The evidence is massive and overwhelming. A special prosecutor must be appointed. This cannot be allowed to happen again in the United States of America. So, Mark, we look at that. And what does it mean when Donald Trump says that a special prosecutor is going to be appointed here to look at something that we already know did not occur? It is a figment of his imagination, and the only reason he's still talking about it is because he's trying to protect his damaged ego. And so in practice, what does this mean? And how can he pervert something like this to actually have dangerous consequences moving forward? Not just some way to protect his ego by being able to get some lackey to be able to say, yes, there was fraud in the election, but how can he take that, manipulate it, and use it to hurt this country moving forward?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, there actually was a special prosecutor appointed to look into the aftermath of the 2020 election. His name was Jack Smith. As I recall, he actually indicted someone in Washington, D.C., who I think, oh, that was Donald Trump. Yes. So we already had a special counsel look into this. And what they found was that this was all a bunch of bullshit that he's spewing today, and that Donald Trump himself actually engaged in criminal activity. And by the way, the Department of Justice found that thousands of other people who Donald Trump eventually pardoned also broke the law. So I just want to say that at the outset so we don't lose sight of the fact that this actually has been investigated.
Right.
But you're exactly right. I mean, what Donald Trump wants to do is not just soothe his ego here, but he literally intends there to be a federal prosecutor with the resources of the federal government, the ability to convene grand juries, the ability to, subpoena records, to look into why he lost the 2020 election with a predetermined outcome, which is to say that, he didn't lose the 2020 election, but rather there was, as he says, massive and overwhelming fraud. And he doesn't care that the evidence won't say that. And by the way, you know who else won't care? Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi is not going to be like, oh, no, Mr. President. First of all, it would be inappropriate for you as the president to instruct me, the attorney general, to investigate anyone. It would be especially inappropriate, Mr. President, where it involves, your political opponents and your own election. And, Mr. President, if we investigate that, we need to follow the facts where they go. And by the way, if they don't prove fraud on the part of the other side, but they show misfeasance by your campaign or by your lawyers or by your supporters in trying to overturn the outcome of a free and fair election, we're going to have to prosecute those people. Pam Bondi's not going to say any of that, right? Pam Bondi is going to take this as a directive, and she's going to hire a special counsel within the Department of Justice, or appoint a special counsel maybe within the Department of Justice, and give them a big fat budget to go after Donald Trump's political opponents. But Brian, you and I have been watching him go after his political opponents for years. In his first term, we saw this, and we certainly have seen it in the second term.
Mark, if he's able to get some validation on these bogus claims of fraud, for example, does that give him a pretense to be able to interfere in elections either on behalf of himself or on behalf of the Republican Party moving forward? Like if he can say, remember when I told you that there were vote dumps in Detroit and Milwaukee and that machines were rigged and these were stolen and we tried to seize the voting machines to be able to look into this stuff, but they wouldn't let us. But now we have definitive proof because we had Special Prosecutor Ted Cruz look into this, or Special Prosecutor Matt Gaetz look into this. Will that then serve as a pretense for him to be able to say, and now for 2026 and 2028, we need to be able to seize the voting machines. We need to be able to have insight into what the states are doing. We need to be able to have the final say in the Republican legislatures or whatever it may be.
That's exactly right. Look, people forget that after the 2016 election, which by the way is an election he won, he went on a witch hunt against Hillary Clinton's campaign, claiming election interference. And he convinced Bill Barr to actually appoint a special counsel named John Durham. And John Durham rummaged around for several years, ultimately brought a handful of indictments. Those led to acquittals, by the way, right? The people who he indicted wound up being found not guilty by a jury. He produced a report which was not supported by the evidence of the acquittals. And Donald Trump and his supporters have been citing John Durham as a great success, notwithstanding the obvious outcome to the contrary. So here, like, you know, and that, by the way, that was under Bill Barr, who was like, you know, a tower of steel compared to Pam Bondi when it comes to standing up to Donald Trump. So Pam Bondi will appoint, and by the way, you know, you laugh that Matt Gaetz, like, sure, like it could be Matt Gaetz. It could be someone,
hell, he was almost the top law enforcement official in the United States.
Yeah, see, they're going to put someone in charge who, with a predetermined outcome, that person is going to intimidate and terrorize a whole bunch of Democratic officials and operatives and lawyers and whomever are going to try, or at least going to try to, and then is going to issue a report saying exactly what Donald Trump wants. Like, even if there are no criminal prosecutions, like, we've looked at the evidence and this was the outcome, and here are our recommendations going forward. And Donald Trump will use that as a pretense to say, number one, I did win in 2020. Number two, there were all these criminals on the other side. And number three, I now need to prevent that in 2026 and 2028 by having the Department of Justice, my FBI, my prosecutors, as he'll call them, you know, directly involved in the voting process, in the vote counting, in the screening process, in the tabulation process, whatever it is, whatever he thinks he needs to do. And so that's what Donald Trump wants. And it's hard to see which part of the Republican Party establishment, his cabinet, Congress, stands up to him.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'll be maybe Thomas Massie and Rand Paul. Like, that's it. They're maybe the only last two people who can say, like, we have some deference to the 10th Amendment to the Constitution and that we don't want the federalization of the entire government. But other than that,
look, this is the thing, Brian. I'm not speculating here. You know, I was the general counsel of the Hillary Clinton's campaign.
Yeah.
So I know exactly what happened with the John Durham investigation and Donald Trump and Bill Barr and all of that. I was the lawyer for Joe Biden who litigated or headed the litigation in the post-election of 2020 that led to, you know, ultimately Donald Trump inciting a violent insurrection in the nation's capital to try to overturn the election. I fought and won those more than 60 of those lawsuits that Donald Trump and his allies brought after 2020. I brought a lot of the litigation, was involved in a lot of litigation before the 2020 election to ensure that there were free and fair elections when Donald Trump was trying to make voting nearly impossible in the middle of a pandemic. So I'm not speculating about what Donald Trump is doing here. Donald Trump has one playbook, and that is to misuse his position of power to try to target his political opponents and to try to influence the system for his political benefit. It's why he's arresting Democratic elected officials around the country. It's why he's sending troops and National Guardsmen into Democratic cities. It's why he talks about breaking political power of the Democrats in these cities. This is not a joke. This is not like Donald Trump unhinged, but put the crazy uncle back in the attic.
Right.
This guy is actually able to get his subordinates to execute his desires, and this is one of his desires.
Which raises the obvious question: what tools do we have at our disposal to fight back, and will they be enough to combat what he's able to do with the full strength of the federal government?
So look, I think there are a couple of things we need to do. Obviously, we need the courts to stand up and do the right thing. We need the courts to be a bulwark. But the biggest thing we need courage. We need courage from our elected officials. We need courage from the lawyers. We need courage from people who were involved in the 2020 election. And we need courage in the media, in civil society, and in the American public. Because what Donald Trump is counting on is that he will intimidate a political opponent. He will have them investigated, and everybody else will move away from them. That person will be left isolated. And he's counting on the legacy media doing their part. He's counting on civil society staying quiet because they don't want to be targeted. And he's counting on the American public displaying a level of, on the one hand, on the other hand, maybe there's really something there. I mean, literally as we're recording this, the Washington Post has a headline: "For Democrats, handcuffs are the latest symbol of resistance to Trump." I know it's easy to beat up on the Washington Post, but I assure you, no Democrat wants to be manhandled,
Yeah.
arrested, and handcuffed.
Right.
Okay. Alex Padilla is one of the most decent, gentlemanly public servants anyone will ever find. There is not a Republican in Washington, D.C. who would say Alex Padilla is a showman. Alex Padilla is an absolute first-class elected official and public servant. And he didn't want to build credibility or something by being manhandled and arrested. You know, the comptroller in New York had been showing up at these hearings.
For weeks.
What?
For weeks.
Had been showing up at these hearings, right, for weeks, quietly doing his part to try to make the immigration system in the city of New York a little, just an ounce more humane. He didn't ask to be manhandled and arrested. But so what's going to happen here is that Donald Trump is going to count on the fact that there's going to be this special counsel, and the New York Times and the Washington Post and the legacy media will say, you know, Donald Trump appoints special counsel, comma, critics worry. You know, critics say it's an abuse. And then as that special counsel does stuff, it will be treated, well, on the one hand, this is what the Trump administration does. On the other hand, that's what the people. And so what we need is people to have courage. We need people to call this out clear-eyed and full-throatedly, the way you do every single day, that what Donald Trump is doing in weaponizing the Department of Justice, in weaponizing the federal government to go after his political opponents is simply wrong. And when this becomes the next wave of that, in terms of the special counsel looking at 2020, we need people to do that. The legacy media is not going to do it, but we need individual citizens to have that courage.
Well, look, and you have been a leader in terms of calling this stuff out, even in the absence of legacy media. And one small step that we can all take to help elevate Marc's voice, elevate his team's voice, is to subscribe to Democracy Docket. It's Marc's YouTube channel. If you are not yet signed up for this channel, it doesn't cost you anything to do so. Hit the subscribe button, watch some videos, make sure that it grows so that when people come onto YouTube and they're searching for something in the algorithm, that they're not automatically served right-wing content, that they get to hear Marc's voice and his team's voice, and so that good, accurate information is elevated to the top of this conversation here. So again, I'll put that link to your channel right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.